Hey everybody, it's John, the History Buff. I hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to be looking at modern inventions no longer used. Um, I don't know what to say about this, but judging from the first picture and the thumbnail, I don't know if it's just that they're not as popular, but we'll see. Don't forget, sign up for memberships if you can. I think you'll like some of the stuff I'm going to be putting up. And there's also some merch. Let's get to it. Guys, I'm feeling a little under the weather. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get a bunch of these going, so I'm sure I'll make mistakes. And you'll tell me about it. It's cool.
There are many inventions that have enhanced our lives, but a lot of them are things that we no longer use. The smartphone has replaced most of these old technologies. In their time, they were pioneering devices, but now they have resorted to just being pieces of history. In today's video, we'll take a look at some of these inventions that are now long gone. The Stereo 8 was the real name of this product, although most people know it as the 8-track tape. Millions of people used this in the 1970s so they could have music on the go. In the 1980s, the cassette tape took over and made this 8-track obsolete.
Yeah. So, before that, there was just radio, right? In the car, there was AM, and then there was AM and FM. And this was the first thing you could buy, I don't know, Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. You buy Beatles albums, shove them in there, and that 8-track player would play it. So it's the first time you could actually choose what you wanted to listen to. Did you guys have those in Great Britain? I'm pretty sure you probably would have, but dial-up internet.
Before there was cable internet and Wi-Fi, people used their analog telephone line to connect to the internet. After dialing a number, the computer would use the modem to send and receive information to another computer. For all you youngsters out there, a modem was just short for modulator-demodulator. If you ever used one of these, then patience was certainly something you needed. The connection was often slow, and it was also broken and interrupted at times. Not only that, but the phone could not be used at the same time to make calls.
Yeah, I remember that. I in college, I was one of the lucky ones that was able to have a computer, and they had, and this is 1999, my freshman year of college. They had the first cable jacks in there. Before that, it was basically you had in our house we had two phone lines installed. One had been so my brother could talk to his girlfriend and not get interrupted. The other, and then when he moved out, of course, then it became the dedicated dial-up line, and that was you had to wait a long period of time. Things took a long time. If you remember Napster, you could download. I think there's Napster, LimeWire, a whole bunch of things like that. You could download music. It took a little while. And you did have to dial up and wait for the whole thing to go through. And if you picked up the phone on at the other end of the same line in your house or wherever it was, you'd hear it dialing up and dialed up. You'd hear it through the computer. But that was the first real way to get online with a PC in the first real home PC, aside from the Commodore 64s, if you guys remember those. But yeah, I do remember all that fun stuff. I hope you do too. If not, someday I'll show you. As a matter of fact, I still have a Windows 98 computer that still works here because I have old games that I like to play on it, but I haven't done that for years.
The Wing calculator was revolutionary during its time in the 1960s. It made it possible for people to do complicated math, which included square roots and raising numbers to powers. If you look at them now, they just look like antique mini computers, which they are.
Interesting. I don't remember these. Did you have one?
The Walkman came out in 1979, and it made it possible for everyone to listen to their own personal music without disturbing anyone else.
Yes.
These devices took off in the 1980s, and they pioneered that awkward headphone look that we all see today. The Walkman played cassette tapes, which meant there was no instant rewind or fast forward to the next song.
The
Walkman sold more than 400 million devices long before the iPod hit the market. If you hand this device off to any kid today, they would have no clue how to operate it.
True. So one of the interesting things, yeah, you could hit fast forward, and then there was fast forward with a line, those, that 2 hours with a line, and it would take you to the end of the song. It was probably an advancement on that. But I do remember using the Walkman. The first tape I had was, the first tapes were Paul Simon's Graceland, the Beatles' Blue and Red albums, greatest hits. And I think I had the Bangles. But yeah, they were great. And then when the CD players came out, the portable CD players, they would skip. But these you could just beat up and it wouldn't skip or do anything else. But it was kind of a neat. It was a neat thing. And then of course you could listen to the radio through it and other options.
The portable television was never as big of a hit as the Walkman was.
Yeah.
This was mainly due to the fact that they were still somewhat bulky and hard to lug around, plus there was a limited amount of channels. These were used in the 1960s and 1970s, and Sony was the first company to mass produce them. I'm sure it's no surprise that the actual name of this device was the Sony Watchman.
I don't know much about this one. I think I've seen them before, but I'm pretty sure I've seen them before, but I don't think they ever really took off. That's all analog stuff, and it's not a thing. It's not a thing I remember. Did you have one? I don't think I ever. We might have had one when I was a kid, but that was all, satellite based and or antenna based, that kind of stuff. But
pagers or beepers were used by many people long before cell phones became readily available or affordable. In the 1980s, it was common for doctors and rappers to have them, but everyday people also used them. The system would forward incoming calls and messages so that information could be shared. The communication was instant and the network never got overloaded. However, cell phones have sent these to the trash dump.
Yeah, I remember these. It was doctors. It was, and I probably won't say it in here. So it was doctors. It was like businessmen or women, and noteworthy people. Okay, rappers. Yeah, it was kind of cool to be seen as having one. But the idea was that, honestly, guys, if you were a drug dealer, you had one, and you hung around your payphone, and that was a big thing.
After the Sony Walkmans became popular, Sony Discman came out. It was a portable CD player that was invented in 1984, although it wasn't until the 1990s when it took off in popularity. The sound was much better than a cassette tape in the Walkman, but you couldn't run with them or use them in the car, or they would skip while playing music. The other downside to them is that CDs would easily scratch. Whether you had the Walkman or the Discman, you had to have cases for all of your music.
Yep.
One plus for the Discman was that fast forward and rewind was instant with a push of a button. Everyone felt high tech with these, but if you break one out now, most people will just stare at you.
The only thing I didn't mention about these was that you could put them in your car. So if you had a tape player, you could mount these on the dashboard of your car, and then plug in a tape that has a cord to it and put it in your tape deck, and you could play it through the speakers of your car. But yeah, that was a thing.
Long before thumb drives and the cloud, computer users would need to use a floppy disk in order to save their work or file.
If you remember what drive on your computer this was, put it in the comments below.
Storage is very limited on these floppy disks when you compare it to today's standards, but modern computers have much more storage, so it has rendered these floppy disks obsolete. The peak usage for these was in the 1980s and 1990s. They could hold up to 2.8 megabytes, which is great for a simple text file of the time, but it's barely enough for a photo or two in today's modern age.
All right. I remember those things. Once they got bent, and that was that. And then they came out with the smaller, what were they called? 3 millimeter or 3 something, maybe 3 millimeters. It was a thickness. They were more of a hard drive. I remember writing a lot of papers on those in school. And then you put them into your, everybody say it with me, A drive. That was your A drive. Now you don't have an A drive. You just have what is it? The C drive is your computer. The D drive is for a disk. I forget what the B drive is. But that's the way it went. Anything you added after that just went down the alphabet.
Gramophones or phonographs were created in 1877 by Thomas Edison.
Are we sure about that? Come on, people who were interested in the 10 Things America Stole from Great Britain video.
And it was his favorite invention. This was the first device that allowed a user to play a recording. Edison used tinfoil coated cylinders to record the sound. Years later, the gramophone was replaced by the much lighter record player.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people we would talk about things that America stole from the British in an earlier video, and there were a lot of things that Americans had taken, but the main thing that I was trying to get across to people in the comments was, well, first of all, read the other comments before you make your comment, because somebody's probably already made it. But the other part of it was that in the time period of when the gramophone and the record player were being made, they were taken from something that was already like close and making it better. Edison was known for that, like the light bulb. He wasn't the inventor of the light bulb. What he did was he created a mass-produced, usable, workable light bulb. He had the backing of money. It's sort of like the what's his name in New Zealand started the first air. Had the first flight heavier than air. Way to fly. The Wright brothers, had backers. They had the marketing. So guess who gets the credit? You know what I mean? But all of us who know or who are interested in kind of cutting through the garbage, we all know that, where they come from. And sometimes it has to do with things getting stuck in a patent office as well. So there are a lot of different ways of looking at things, but ultimately, when the public knows the things, when the public, the large group of people get the first major blast of something, that's the person who gets the credit. And America was really good at that. We're good at hogging credit.
The video home system, or VHS as most people called them, revolutionized watching movies at home.
Oh yeah.
The first home video recorder came out in 1965. The Sony VCR used a reel-to-reel format, and it could only record in black and white. By the 1980s, VCRs were in many households. Not only could you watch your favorite movies at home, but you could also record your favorite shows and watch them later.
Yeah, there was a thing called it was either VCR, you can get or VHS, or there was another one, a competing one called Beta, and VCR won out, and that was that. I remember those.
Typewriters were first invented in the second half.
By the way, people got really pissed off when CDs came out, and it was obvious that CDs were a thing because you had to get rid of all your VHS tapes and buy all the ones on CDs. It was brilliant marketing.
For the 19th century. They were much faster than writing by hand, and they were also much neater. Typewriters evolved over the years into word processors and then computers, which basically sent this item to the technology graveyard. In the future, the need for typing on a computer may disappear as voice-to-text becomes more widespread.
But they were really durable before the word processor came out. I do remember the word processor was a giant thing, and top came up. It was made by like Texas Instrument or one of the places that made calculators, and I think Panasonic may have had one. But typewriters, I mean, they took them to World War II, they took them to Vietnam, they took them to I think World War One. I'm almost positive. All the different wars, all the different major events, they were all typed up on the typewriter, and you had to be really good. This was a skill if you were a typist. How fast could you type? I remember being in school, and you had to do better than 140 or 120 words per minute. Now I think people don't even care. But yeah, I had a course on that. And did you? Let me know.
The tape drive is an antique item now, but at one time it was a necessary thing to have. This data storage device stored data on a magnetic tape, and the operation took place overnight. Compared to today's standard of saving data, it was super slow. Finding what you needed on that tape was also time-consuming. It's another item from long ago that required a lot of patience.
Actually, that I don't recall ever
The
seeing.
IBM Simon was the first smartphone, even though that label didn't exist at the time. It was invented in 1992, long before an iPhone came out 15 years later in 2007.
Oh.
Simon became available for sale in 1994, and yes, it could send emails. This device was the beginning of the super smartphones that we all know today.
Interesting. I never heard of the Simon.
The boombox or ghetto blaster was a great way to have music on the go, but it also meant that everyone else had to listen to it as well.
Yep.
This was portable, but many of them were big, heavy, and required an endless supply of batteries. If you never had one of these, then you were probably born after its peak in the 1980s. These devices can still be purchased today, but they are much smaller and cheaper. Modern versions do not need batteries as they are rechargeable.
Yep, I remember those. I had one.
The DVD was invented in 1993, but it took a while for this to catch on because people were still happy with their VCR players. In 2002, the DVD finally outsold the VCR. DVDs ruled the world until modern streaming options became available. They are still sold in stores, but they are fast becoming obsolete since the main consumer on the market isn't interested in them.
Well, kids don't understand them really because you can download and purchase your own music. It was, I don't know. I as a matter of fact, I bought a DVD because I couldn't find it anywhere else of Band of Brothers, the whole set, because otherwise I'd have to purchase it and then I watch it one time and it goes away. I'm not a huge fan of the streaming services and buying things. There should be a place where you can download and store them.
The audio cassette, also known as the tape, first came out in 1963. These allowed users to listen to music, but it also allowed them to make their own recordings. They were durable as well as portable, and they became available for usage in the home, the car, and just about anywhere. Eventually, the CD would put a dent on its popularity, but there are still plenty of people from the 80s who have tons of fun listening to these.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. John Lennon put Free as a Bird on there, and Real Love, which the Beatles redid. Hotel California. They had these, I think Hotel California, the sound was put on there. And people who were in business would dictate, like doctors, they would dictate on these things, smaller versions. But they would dictate things on there and then have usually a secretary, or now known as an administrative assistant, type up what they said on there. So you could remember your thoughts. And yeah, but they were big for a while. And it wasn't until the Walkman came out that you could listen to stuff on the go. But, you'd have a home system. So...
Personal data assistants, or PDAs, were quite popular, and they made life a lot easier for many people. They held various pieces of information, such as names or phone numbers.
Yep.
They also helped people set reminders for meetings and manage their time throughout the day. These devices had pen-based keyboards, voice recognitions, and could even send a fax. They became obsolete in the 2010s as smartphones, which were smaller and lighter, gained in popularity.
Yeah, I do remember them. I never actually had one because I'm an analog person. I write stuff down, and it's just the way it is. But I do remember a lot of people would a lot of the more organized people love these things because the computers didn't really screw up. But then, of course, smartphones coming out, they took care of the calculator, your music, everything. I mean, my son asked I had an old, one of those old cameras, an old digital camera. And he's like, what's this? And I'm like, it's a camera. He's like, well, why don't you just take a picture on your phone? And I was like, all right. And then I had to explain to him.
CRT TV stands for cathode ray tube television. In the 1960s, almost every American household had one. Sony stopped making theirs in 2004, and everyone else stopped in 2008. They were basically just huge, heavy, boxy monitors, and it's hard to believe that we have bigger televisions now that are lighter and flatter.
Yep. Yeah, you needed all that room.
ARPANET stood for Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, and it was invented in 1969. It was an experimental computer network that some say is the very beginning of the internet. The ARPANET was funded by the Department of Defense, and the purpose of it was to connect computers at research facilities funded by the Pentagon. This service has not been used since 1982.
I remember now hearing about ARPANET, but I'm one of the few believers, and feel free to make fun of me, do whatever you want. Well, within the limits of the comments, what they allow, be polite about it. But I do believe that the internet probably would have been invented at some point with the way that we were going with technology. So if you ask, there was who invented the internet and all that, I think just like a lot of other inventions, it's an idea of interconnectability. I mean, we had telephones that you could contact with anybody else. It kind of was a matter of time. You look at when the internet became a www dot, which that was not an American idea. When it became reality, how far we've come and how fast. It would have happened at some point. Maybe not in the same form as we know it now, but pretty close. It might have been Boogle that we use.
Betamax and VHS competed for a share of the market in the 1980s. It was invented in 1975 by Sony, and the heavy analog machine could record audio and video for up to an hour. In 2016, the company announced it would stop producing these Betamax tapes, which seems kind of odd since they have not been popular since VHS took over the market in the 1980s.
Yeah, it had limitations compared to VHS.
If you were living in the 1980s, then you probably remember these. Calculator watches were relatively popular among tech-savvy people. Even Marty McFly from the Back to the Future series had one. In some ways, this little device helped pave the way for PDAs and smartphones. Very few people even wear a simple wristwatch since there is a clock on their smartphone.
It's true. I used to be a very heavy watch wearer, and not anymore. But yeah, those were great because you had the calculator on there, which was great for school. A lot of kids had those. Really, the techie sort of smarter kids, some would say nerdy, I don't know, had those. They had an alarm on them. You could set alarms. You wore it at night, because your alarm would wake you up in the morning. If you wanted that, you could set it. It was really cool. It was Casio, I think, made the first one, if I'm not mistaken.
Laserdiscs were huge and bulky, but they were expected to take over the market from VHS tapes.
I remember hearing that.
However, they were quite pricey when they first came out in 1978.
78?
Plus, their 12-inch diameter kept most people from investing in them.
Yeah, they were big.
They remained on the market until consumers latched on to the DVD.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a friend of mine bought a Laserdisc system. We all know that one guy who has I turned this whole room into a complete sound system, and then 10 years later you're like, hey, how'd that Laserdisc work out for you?
Reel-to-reel tapes was a standard until digital recording formats came along.
That's what Hotel California was recorded on. It was Don Felder from the Eagles, and I only say that for an idea of a timeline. That was 1974 or 5 when he actually recorded this sort of that style of Hotel California, and then he said it was a reel-to-reel that he recorded it on, and later put it on a tape.
Sound professionals use these along with other industries that had a need to record conversations.
Like
the audio was recorded on a magnetic tape held on a reel. These are certainly big and bulky when you compare them today to digital devices.
Okay. Yeah.
The transistor radio was used to listen to music and the radio. This beloved device was everywhere in the 1970s. For many people, it holds a special memory as it introduced them to the world and brought them music.
I do remember the transistor radio. The transistor was a huge leap in technology.
The telegraph changed the world when it was in use. This form of communication allowed users to communicate over great distances. It worked by transmitting electrical signals over a wire stretched between stations. This device was the foundation for many other communication inventions such as the telephone, fax, and the internet.
Yep. Matter of fact, in history, when I like studying U.S. history. I studied a lot of it, but now I'm moving out into the rest of the world, trying to understand more of it for the context and just because I'm curious. That's what buffs do, I think. And one of the big things was that during our Civil War in 1860 to 65, 1861 to 65, but in 1860 we had telegraph poles all over the place. It was the first time you could find out whether you won or lost a battle, and there were so many of them. And as a matter of fact, it was you could send a message, and you could coordinate with things like railways and things like that. It really brought communications into the modern world. It was Morse code and stuff like that. Yeah.
I'm sure that many of these devices are something you're familiar with, and perhaps you have some special memories associated with them.
Yeah.
Of course, there are many others that could.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. What did they not mention on here that that was sort of like a big thing that we don't use anymore today? I'm curious. I think they did a decent list, and this is mostly almost all 20th century stuff and 21st century stuff, but I'm trying to think if there was anything from the 19th or 18th century that we used for a long time that we don't anymore. Maybe up until recently, but anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget, there is memberships where you can see me flip out on videos that are not what they said they were, and there is merch if you want to do that. Also, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Y'all take care.